Watercolor realism is also hard to do and hard to find good books for it. I've previously reviewed Mary White's book and said that it didn't have enough steps. I've also talked about Michael Rocco's book on realistic watercolor textures and said I liked it. If I had to choose a favorite watercolor realism book that I had, I would have to choose this book. This book is called Glorious Garden Flowers in Watercolor by Susan Harrison-Tustain. And yes, she only shows flowers. She doesn't show people or animals, but her paintings are so real and done with so much care and detail and layers that you can apply this method to just about anything. So all you have to do is learn how to paint like this, and once you learn how to paint like this, you can apply it to anything. And I've always said that botanical painters do a good job. I've mentioned Billy Shoal in the past. Susan Harrison-Tustain only has the one book, but it's actually a much more realistic looking book and prettier paintings than just about anybody's botanical paintings. So these would be the prettiest botanical paintings I've ever seen. And I've seen many, many books and many, many paintings. And she has some pretty good instruction in here. She calls it her priming method and her layering method. All it really is the grisaille method. So it's the grisaille method of layering using a tonal underwash, and she doesn't really explain that that's what that is, but that's exactly what that is. So she's calling it something else, but it's grisaille. So you can see here that she starts out with a yellow underwash, so she's, instead of using a sepia color or a brown color or a neutral gray, she's using warm and cool yellows. She turns it into a grisaille underwash and then puts the painting of the colors of the flowers on top of that. It adds this great depth to it. The plus is that it's still luminous, transparent watercolor, so it has this beautiful light and transparency, and yet it looks like very realistic painting. So this is harder to work with, of course, than gouache or oil or acrylic, but less fumes than oil or acrylic, and also good for your health and good for the environment in comparison to oil and acrylic. Then you can find out how to layer like this in transparent watercolor. And again, it'll give you some of the most realistic looking things that you can paint. So this is a great book to have. It was one of the first books I ever bought, because the first time I was ever really interested in watercolor painting, I was wanting to get into realistic painting right from the very start, because that's how I drew. I drew very realistically. So I thought, well, I wanted to see this book, and of all the other books on the shelves that I saw in bookstores or online, this book had the most realism, and so this has been my favorite book for many years. So I would highly, highly recommend this book. And if you want to learn how to do watercolor realism that is transparent and not opaque like with gouache, then I would recommend getting this book. It's called Glorious Garden Flowers in Watercolor by Susan Harrison-Tustain. It's my favorite watercolor realism painting book that I've been able to find for techniques and how to make stuff look luminous and yet very real.